Federal Girls Unity College, Port Harcourt, was a place where girls from all corners of Nigeria came to learn, bond, and grow into promising young women. The school, with its red brick buildings and sprawling green fields, was a beacon of unity in a country as diverse as Nigeria. The girls came from all over, Lagos, Kano, Enugu, Jos, everywhere, bringing with them their cultures, their stories, and their dreams. Yet, there was one story that no one dared to tell, a story that every girl knew but never spoke about, the whistling silent sound of the night. It all began with a sound, a strange, scary sound that echoed through the halls of Oduye House, one of the oldest dormitories in the school. The building had always been a bit of a mystery, with its creaking doors and flickering lights, but no one paid much attention to it until the night they first heard it. Cos, cos, cos. The sound was unmistakable. The rhythm click of a woman's high heels, walking slowly but deliberately through the hallways. The girls would lie in their bunks, eyes wide open in the dark, clutching their blankets as the sound grew closer and closer. Cos, cos, cos. It will start from the far end of the corridor near the prefect's room and make its way slowly down the hall, passing each room in turn. The sound was clear, distinct, but when the brave ones peeped through the cracks in the doors or from the sides of their mosquito nets, there was no one there, just the echoing sound of heels on the polished concrete floor. Some claimed they even saw only high-heeled shoes walking the floor without legs. On the first night, they had thought it was just a prank, maybe the seniors trying to scare the juniors. But as Please subscribe to this channel, turn on your notification bell, like, and comment. Thank you. As the nights passed and the sound continued, the fear began to spread. Whispers filled the dining hall at breakfast, but no one dared to speak out loudly about it. The prefects, Amina, Ngozi, and Bisi, were the first to caution everyone to keep quiet. Don't talk about it, Amina had warned one morning after the noise had been particularly loud the previous night. Her eyes were wide and fearful. Just don't. But in every school, there are always those who are too curious for their own good. Adanne, a bright, stubborn girl from Owerri, was one of such students. She had always been intrigued by mysteries and had a reputation for solving puzzles, be they mathematical or otherwise. She was the first to break the unspoken rule. I don't know why everyone is so scared, though, she whispered to her best friend, Fatima, as they sat in the corner of the library. It's just a noise. Maybe it's a rat or a loose floorboard. Fatima's eyes darted around nervously. Adanne, please, let's not talk about it. You know what happened to Ifoma? Ifoma, the name sent a chill down Adanne's spine. Ifoma had been the first girl to openly talk about the sounds. She had laughed it off, calling the rest of them cowards for being afraid of mere noise. The next morning, she had woken up unable to speak. Her voice was gone, replaced by a strange high-pitched whistle whenever she tried to speak. The doctors had come, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. They said it was psychological, maybe stress. But the girls knew better. They knew it was the whistling silent sound of the night. As the days turned into weeks, the fear in Oduye House grew. Girls who were once brave now cowered under their covers at night, praying silently as the sound grew nearer. No one dared to speak of it, not after what happened to Ifoma, and the silence became a part of their nightly routine. But not everyone was content with the silence. Adanne's curiosity had turned into burning obsession. She had always been known for her fearlessness, but this was different. This wasn't just about solving a mystery. This was about finding the truth. She couldn't stand the fear that had gripped her friends, the way they jumped at shadows and refused to walk alone at night. She was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter the cost. One night, when the sound began its nightly journey down the hall, Adanne made a decision. She threw off her blanket and swung her feet over the side of the bed. Fatima, who was lying next to her, grabbed her arm. Adanne, no, don't do it. But Adanne shook her off. I have to, Fatima. I have to know. She tiptoed to the door and cracked it open. Just a splinter enough to see, but not to be seen. The sound was getting louder and closer. Curse, curse, curse. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short, sharp breaths. She felt the fear rising in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had to be brave. She had to see. As the sound drew nearer, Adanne's eyes widened. There, in the dim light of the hallway, she saw something, a shadow. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, and the sound stopped. Adanne slammed the door shut, her heart racing. She turned to face Fatima, her face pale. I saw it, she whispered. I saw something. Fatima shook her head, tears in her eyes. Adanne, please, just forget it, please. Adanne couldn't forget. The image of the shadow was burned into her mind. She knew now there was something or someone behind the sound, and she was determined to find out what it was. The following day, Adanne couldn't concentrate in class. Her mind kept drifting back to the shadow, to the sound of the hills. She decided to visit the school library after school. If there was something strange going on in Oduye House, maybe there was a record of it somewhere. The library was quiet. The only sound was the soft rustling of pages as students read. Adanne made her way to the back, where the older records were kept. She searched through the archives, pulling out old newspapers, yearbooks, anything that might give her a clue. Hours passed, and just when she was about to give up, she found it. An old dusty yearbook from 1978. The pages were yellowed with age, but there on one of the pages was a picture of a girl. She was smiling, her eyes bright and full of life. But what caught Adanne's attention were her shoes, high-heeled shoes that looked exactly like the ones she had heard every night. Beneath the picture was a name, Ijeoma Akune. Adanne's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the girl behind the sound? She quickly flipped through the pages, searching for more information, and then she found it, an obituary. Ijeoma Akune had been a student at the school, a prefect in Oduye House. She had passed in 1978 under mysterious circumstances. The details were vague, but it was clear that her passing had been sudden and unexpected. Adanne's mind raced. Could Ijeoma's spirit still be wandering the halls of Oduye House? Was she the one making the sound? She had to find out more. Please subscribe to this channel, turn on your notification bell, like, and comment. Thank you. That night, Adanne couldn't sleep. Her mind was buzzing with questions. She decided to stay awake to wait for the sound. Maybe, just maybe, she could confront whatever it was that was haunting them. Midnight came, and with it the familiar sound of the hills. Curse, curse, curse. Adanne felt a shiver run down her spine, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had to be brave. She had to know. The sound grew louder, closer, and then, just as it had the night before, it stopped. Adanne held her breath, waiting. She could feel the tension in the air, the fear, and then she heard it, a whisper, soft, barely audible, but it was there. She said quietly, "Leave." Adanne froze. The whisper was so faint, so quiet, but she heard it. She knew she heard. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. She could not move. She could not speak. And then the sound started again, moving away this time, down the hall. Curse, curse, curse. As the sound faded, Adanne finally found her voice. She stumbled back to her bed, her heart racing. She knew now that there was something there, something that didn't want them to know, something that was there. and she knew she had to find out what it was before it was too late. The following morning, Adanne was quiet. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't even look at Fatima. She knew she had to be careful. She couldn't let anyone know what she had discovered. Not yet. Not until she had all the answers. But as she sat in class, her mind racing, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around, but everyone was focused on the teacher. She was just being paranoid, she told herself. But deep down, she knew that something was wrong, very wrong. The days passed and the tension in Oduye House grew. The sound continued every night without fail. The girls were on edge, their nerves frayed. They jumped at every sound, every shadow, and still no one dared to speak of it. Adanne knew she had to do something. She couldn't let the fear consume them all. She decided to confide in Fatima and a few other trusted friends. Zainab, Chiamaka, and Miriam. They met in secret in a quiet corner of the library. "I think it's a ghost," Adanne whispered, her voice barely audible. "I think it's Ijoma Akune." The girls were in shock. They had all heard the stories, the rumors, but to hear it spoken aloud, to hear Adanne say it so confidently, was something else entirely. "What do we do?" Chiamaka asked, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to find out what she wants," Adanne replied. The girls exchanged nervous glances. They knew it was dangerous, knew that talking about it could make them go dumb like Ifoma, but they also knew that they couldn't live in fear forever. They made a pact that night, a solemn vow to stick together no matter what. They would find out the truth, and they would put an end to the whistling silent sound of the night. But as they left the library, a cold wind swept through the hall, and the lights flickered. Adanne felt a chill run down her spine. She knew, deep down, that they were being watched, that someone or something knew that they were planning, and she knew that things were about to get a lot more dangerous. The following night, the air in Oduye House was thick with anticipation. The pact that Adanne and her friends had made weighed heavily on her mind. They knew that tonight they would have to face their fears head on. The group had decided to meet in Adanne's room after lights out. The plan was simple: stay awake, stay together, and listen. If the sound came, they would follow it, try to find its source. They huddled close together, whispering nervously, their faces illuminated by the light of a single candle. "Do you think it is safe?" Miriam asked, her voice trembling. She was the youngest amongst them, her eyes wide with fear. Adanne nodded, though her heart was pounding. "We have to do this, Miriam. We have to know what we're dealing with." The minutes ticked by and the tension in the room grew. Each girl was lost in her thoughts, her fears, and then, just as the clock struck midnight, it began. Kos, 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 kos. The sound of the hills echoed through the hallway, louder than ever before. The girls were in deep fear, clutching each other's hands. The fear was palpable, but they forced themselves to stay calm, to stay focused. "It's coming closer," Zainab whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Adanne nodded. "Stay together. Remember the plan." They waited, their hearts pounding as the sound grew nearer. And then, as he got to the door, it stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, no one dared to breathe. Adanne motioned to them to follow her. She pushed the door open slowly, peering into the hallway. It was empty, just as always, but the sound was unmistakable. It had been right there. They stepped out into the hallway, their footsteps barely making a sound on the cold floor. The air was frigid, and Adanne could feel the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. She motioned for the girls to follow her as she moved down the hallway. The source of the noise. Kos, 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 kos. The sound started again, this time from the far end of the hall. Adanne's breath caught in her throat. She turned to the others. "Stay close," she whispered. And whatever you do, don't look back. They moved forward slowly, carefully, their eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The sound was getting louder and closer. And then suddenly it stopped again. The girls froze, their hearts racing. Adanne squinted into the darkness. There was something there, a figure, a faint figure, but visible. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, but they could see the outline of her dress, the gleam of her shoes, high heels. "Who are you?" Adanne called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer. The figure stood still and silent, watching them. "Please, we just want to know who you are and what you're doing here," Fatima added, her voice barely a whisper. The figure remained silent, and then slowly she began to move towards them, her heels clicking on the floor. Kos, 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 kos. The girls backed away, fear gripping their hearts. But Adanne stood her ground. "What do you want?" she demanded. "What are you hunting us for?" The figure stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it sent chills down their spine. "You shouldn't be here, you know. Leave now, before it's too late." And with that, she vanished. The hallway was empty once more. The sound gone, the girls stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. What was that?" Chiamaka finally managed to say, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Adanne replied, her mind racing. "But we need to find out. We need to find out what happened to Ijoma." The next day, the girls were restless. They had seen the figure. They've heard her voice. They knew that the stories were true, that something was haunting Oduye House. But they also knew they couldn't back down, not now. They decided to visit the school archives again, this time with a new plan. They needed to find out more about Ijoma Akunne, about what had happened to her all those years. If they could understand her past, maybe they could find a way to help her, to end the haunting. The archives were quiet, the air thick with dust. Adanne led the way, pulling out old yearbooks, newspapers, and anything that might hold a clue. They searched for hours, poring over the records until finally Fatima found it. "Here," she said, holding up a faded newspaper clipping. "Ijoma Akunne. She was a student here, just like you said. But look, she had a fire accident." Adanne took the clip, her eyes scanning the words. "A fire?" she murmured. "But why would she still be here? Why would she be haunting us?" Zainab shook her head. "Maybe she's angry. Maybe she feels like she wasn't heard." Adanne nodded. "Or maybe there's something else, something we don't know." They continued searching, their eyes growing tired, their fingers stained with dust. And then they found it. An old journal tucked away on a high shelf. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. But inside, they found something that made their hearts drop. It was Idioma's journal. The last entry was dated just a week before the fire. As they read, a picture began to form. A picture of a girl who was scared, who felt trapped. She wrote about strange things happening in the dormitory, about a figure she kept seeing at night, about whispers in the dark. She knew, Adanne whispered. She knew something was wrong. Fatima's hand trembled as she turned the pages. "It's just like us," she said. She was scared. She was trying to find out what was happening. The last entry was scrawled, almost unreadable. "They're coming for me," it read. "I can hear them. The heels. They are getting closer. I don't think I'll make it out. If anyone finds this, please tell my story. Don't let them silence me." The girls exchanged horrified glances. They knew now that Ijoma's incident had not been an accident. She had been silenced, just like Ifoma, just like so many others. "We have to tell someone," Chiamaka said, her voice shaking. "We have to let them know." But Adanne's head shook. "No, we can't. Not yet. We need more proof. We need to find out who this is, who is behind all of this." That night, the girls made a new plan. They will stay up again, but this time they will split up. If the figure appeared again, they will try to follow her to see where she went, what she wanted. They waited in their rooms, the air tense with anticipation. Midnight came, and with it the sound. Cuss, cuss, cuss. Adanne was in the hallway first, her heart pounding. She saw the figure again, the faint outline in the darkness. She motioned for the others to follow, and they moved quietly, carefully down the hall. The figure moved slowly, her steps deliberate, her heels clicking on the floor. The girls followed, keeping their distance, their eyes fixed on her. She led them down the hallway, past the prefect's room, and then suddenly she stopped. The girls froze, holding their breath. The figure turned, her face still obscured by shadows. "Why are you following me?" she whispered. Adanne stepped forward. "We want to help you," she said. "We want to know what happened to you." The figure was silent for a moment, and then she spoke. "You can't help me," she said. "No one can. But you can save yourselves. Leave before it's too late." And then she was gone. The girls stood in the hallway, their hearts racing, their minds reeling. They knew that whatever was haunting Oduye House was far more dangerous than they had imagined. But they also knew they couldn't stop now. They had to find the truth no matter what. The next day, they decided to explore the dormitory further. They had heard rumors of a room, a forbidden room, that no one was allowed to enter. It was said to be locked, sealed off after the fire that had taken Ijoma. They found it at the end of the hall, a heavy wooden door, its paint peeling, its handle covered in dust. Adanne tried the handle, but it was locked. She turned to the others. "We need to get inside," she said. "There might be something in there, something that can help us." Fatima nodded. "I'll get the key," she said. "I know where the matron keeps it." They waited nervously as Fatima disappeared down the hall. Minutes later, she returned, the key in her hand. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Adanne nodded. "We have to do this. We have to know." They unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was dark, the air stale. They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The room was empty, just an old desk and a few chairs. But on the wall, they saw something that made them very terrified. It was a message written in dark, dripping letters. "Leave or suffer the same fate." The girls stared at the message, their hearts pounding. They knew now that they were in danger, that whatever was haunting them was not going to let them go easily. "We need to get out of here," Chiamaka whispered, her voice shaking. "We need to leave now." But as they turned to go, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The room grew colder, the air thick with fear, and then they heard it, the sound of the hills echoing through the darkness. Cuss, cuss, cuss. The sound grew louder, closer, and the girls backed away, their hearts racing. They knew now that they were not alone, that whatever was haunting Oduye House was in this room, and they feared that they might not make it out alive. The room was ice cold, the darkness almost suffocating. The girls could feel their breath coming in short, panic paces as the sound of the heels grew louder and closer. Cuss, cuss, cuss. Adanne held her flashlight steady, her eyes darting around the room. They had to find a way out, had to escape before it was too late. She motioned for the others to stay close, to stay calm. "Look for another way out," she whispered. "There has to be a window, a vent, something." The girls scattered frantically, searching for the room. The sound of the heels was almost deafening now, echoing off the walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Cuss, cuss, cuss. Fatima tugged on a heavy curtain that was covering one of the walls. "Over here," she shouted. The curtain fell away, revealing a small barred window. It was their only chance. "We need to break it," Zainab said, her voice shaky. "We need to get out." Adanne grabbed a chair and slammed it against the bars. The sound of the metal clanging against metal, mixing with the relentless echo of the heels. The bars were old and rusted. With one final desperate push, they bent just enough for them to squeeze through. Hurry! Adanne urged as she helped the others through the small opening. One by one, they climbed out into the cold night air, their breaths forming mist in the moonlight. They stumbled into the overgrown courtyard behind the dormitory, their hearts racing, but they were free. They had escaped the room, but they knew the hunting was far from over. As they caught their breath, Adanne turned to the others. We need to end this, she said, her voice resolute. We need to find out what really happened to Ijoma and why she's haunting us. Determined to end the hunting once and for all, the girls decided to go to the one person who might know the truth, Madame Efwa, the school's oldest matron. She had been at the school for decades, long enough to remember Ijoma. They found Madame Efwa in her quarters, a small room at the back of the administrative building. She was sitting by the window, her face bathed in the soft glow of a lantern. Please subscribe to this channel, turn on your notification bell, like, and comment. Thank you. She looked up as they entered, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. What are you girls doing here at this hour? She asked, her voice stern. We need to know about Ijoma Akunne, Adanne said, stepping forward. We know she had a fire incident, but there's more to the story, isn't there? She's haunting us, and we need to know why. Madame Efwa's expression softened, her eyes filling with a mix of fear and sadness. She sighed deeply and gestured for them to sit. It was a long time ago, she began, her voice heavy with regret. Ijoma was a bright girl, a prefect like you, but she was different. She could see things, hear things that no one else could. She used to talk about a figure in the dormitory, a woman in high heels. We thought she was just imagining things. But then the fire happened. She paused, her hands trembling. The official story was that it was an accident. But I know better. Ijoma was trying to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences in the dormitory, just like you girls are doing now. And she got too close to the truth. The fire was no accident. Someone, something, wanted her silenced. The girls exchanged horrified glances. They knew now that Ijoma had been trying to warn them, to protect them from the same fate. Who? Fatima asked, her voice barely a whisper. Who wanted her silenced? Madame Efwa looked at them, her eyes filled with fear. I don't know, she said softly. But I know this. The figure she saw, the woman in the high heels, it wasn't a ghost. It was someone real. Someone who wanted to keep the secrets of Oduye House buried. The girls left Madame Efwa's quarters, their minds racing. They knew they were close to the truth, but they also knew that they were in more danger than ever. Whoever or whatever was behind the hunting wasn't going to let them go so easily. That night, they decided to set a trap. They would wait in the hallway, hidden, and try to catch whoever or whatever was making the sound. They were scared, but they knew they had to be brave. Midnight came, and with it the familiar sound of the heels. Cos, cos, cos. The girls held their breath, watching as the figure appeared at the end of the hallway. But this time they were ready. As the figure drew closer, Adanne flipped on a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. Stop! She shouted. The figure froze, caught in the light. For a moment, everything was still, and then the figure turned and fled. The girls chased after her, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. Get her! Zainab shouted. They ran through the dark corridors, the figure always just out of reach. But then, just as they rounded a corner, the figure tripped, falling to the ground. Adanne rushed forward, grabbing her arm. Who are you? She demanded. The figure struggled, but Adanne held firm. The flashlight beam showed her face, and the girls were in shock. It was Mrs. Njoku, one of the school's teachers. What are you doing? Fatima asked, shocked. Mrs. Njoku's eyes were wide with fear, her face pale. You don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. I was trying to protect you, Ijeoma. She knew too much. She was going to expose everything. Expose what? Adanne demanded. Mrs. Njoku hesitated and then she broke. There are things that happen in this school, things that aren't supposed to happen. Ijeoma found out and she tried to tell. They wouldn't let her. We had to stop her. The girls were horrified. They had never imagined that a teacher, someone they trusted, could be behind the haunting. The truth was out. The danger was far from over. As they stood in the hallway, the air grew colder and they felt a presence behind them. They turned to see the faint outline of Ijeoma, her face calm but sad. Thank you, she whispered, her voice soft. Thank you for finding the truth. Adanne stepped forward. Ijeoma, we are sorry. We are very sorry, she said. We are sorry for what happened to you. Ijeoma smiled, a faint, ghostly smile. It wasn't your fault, she said. But now you know. Now you can make things right. The girls nodded, tears in their eyes. They knew what they had to do. They had to make sure that nothing like this ever happened again. They had to make sure that the secrets of Oduye House were finally brought to light. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, Ijeoma was gone. The air grew warm again, and the sound of the hills had faded into nothingness. The next day, the girls went straight to the principal's office. They told her everything about the sounds, about Mrs. Njoku, about Ijeoma. The principal listened, her face growing pale. This is serious, she said finally. We need to investigate this. We need to make sure that everyone involved is held accountable. The investigation was swift and the truth came out. Mrs. Njoku and a few others had been covering up a series of incidents at the school. The things they had done and they did not want anyone to know about. Ijeoma had found out and they had to take care of her to protect themselves. But now the truth was out and justice was served. The school was changed forever, but it was a change for the better. The girls knew that they had done the right thing, that they had finally found justice for Ijeoma. As the weeks passed, the fear in Oduye House faded. The girls could sleep. Please subscribe to this channel, turn on your notification bell, like, and comment. Thank you. Peacefully again, knowing that the haunting was over. They had faced their fears, uncovered the truth, and made sure that Ijeoma's story was finally told. And as they stood together in the courtyard, watching the sun rise over the red brick buildings of Federal Girls Unity College, Port Harcourt, they knew that they had done something truly remarkable. They had ended the whistling silent sounds of the night. And in doing so, they had become stronger, braver, and more united than ever before.